Saturday, November the 6th, outdoor work day. 11:30 to 5, however long you can come and stay. So plan on that. If you can help out with that, again, 11:30, it should be all the way up to maybe 40 degrees by then. Maybe snow, who knows. Frost the last couple of mornings, isn't that great? No. But Saturday, 11:30, if you can come and help outdoors, bring some gloves, hats, whatever you need to work. If you got some tools or something, rakes, whatever. We got a bunch of stuff going on. So if you can help out, please do that. Membership class, November the 20th. So if you're interested in finding out the next steps of membership, November the 20th, which is a Saturday, 9 o'clock in the morning here at the church building, probably right here in this room. We'll set up for that. And so you can sign up for that online. You can see me, see Pastor Stephen, see Pastor Jerry, let us know, and we'll make sure you're plugged in for that. Normal schedule on Sunday. Hope you'll plan on being here. We're moving on to 1 Corinthians 6, so this week is going to be easier. We're going to talk about lawsuits. So plan on being here for all the rules on how to sue your fellow Christians. All right, let's pray and get started. Father, give us a good time together tonight in your word. Encourage us with it and remind us of your control and your sovereignty and your plan for us. May we learn and love you more because of it. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, we are in 2 Kings 17, so turn there. And last week we spent a bunch of time in the life of Ahaz, who was the king of Judah. All right. Who is the king of Israel at the same time? I'm sorry, king of Israel. Did I say that? All right, so you have a couple, right? You have Pekah, who is the son of Remaliah, and he is threatening Ahaz. And Pekah and Remaliah, Pekah and Rezin, who is the king of Damascus. They kind of team together, and they are working to conquer Israel. Long story, and Judah. Long story short, Pekah is killed by Hoshea. All right, Hoshea. 2 Kings 17 is where we're at, 12th year of Ahaz. I don't have the thing up on the board for you tonight. Hopefully you have that etched into your memory, right? And so you can remember all those dates. So 2 Kings 17, the 12th year of Ahaz, Hoshea, the son of Elah, becomes king over Israel, and Samaria reigns 9 years. So he became king because he assassinated Pekah. So if you want to become king, kill the guy before you, I guess is the teaching there. Right? He becomes king in the year 732. Now, that is the 12th year of Ahaz. It is the 20th year of Jotham, who's the son of Uzziah. And so when you kind of put those together, remember I said last week and all through this, we've talked about those dates, and you try to add up all the numbers. There's some confusing things in there. Don't get lost in those dates. It's just the reality of the way that the dates are recorded for us. And there's a number of different ways it works. At the end of the day, there are some things about the dates we just don't know. We just can't quite put them together, and we assume the problem is here, not here. All right, whatever the Bible says, that's what we want to go with, and just understand there's some things we just don't know about. All right, Hoshea does evil in the sight of the Lord, only not as the kings of Israel who were before him. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Because up till now, all the kings of Israel, when it says it does evil, what does it normally follow it with? Just like Jeroboam, right? He did evil just like Jeroboam. And so you have this situation where all the kings of the north, almost all of them are measured up against Jeroboam. And then you get to Hoshea, and ironically, he's the last king. I just gave away the end of the story. How many of you didn't know that, right? He's the last king of Israel. He's actually one of the ones who didn't do evil. So you think, why is that the case? The guy who who is not as evil as all the kings before is the guy who ends up being the one that oversees the final blow. Shalmaneser is the king of Assyria. Shalmaneser is the son of the Assyrian king we talked about last week, whose name was Tiglath-Pileser III. All right, so you have Tiglath-Pileser III. His son, he dies. I believe he died about 735, if I remember correctly. I don't have that in my notes. So about 735 he dies. His son Shalmaneser, and this is actually historically, the Bible doesn't tell us this, but we know from external Assyrian records, this is Shalmaneser V. All right, so he is the son of Tiglath-Pileser III. He comes up against him. Hoshea becomes a servant and pays him tribute. So basically, this is a tax. I won't kill you if you give me money. I guess, it's the ancient mafia. It's a nice little kingdom you have there. It'd be a shame for you to lose it. How much money you want, and you just start handing it over, right? Okay, so what happens, though? The king of Assyria found a conspiracy in Hoshea, who sent messengers to So, king of Egypt. Offered no tribute to the king. So he has this deal, and then somewhere in the process, he goes south to Egypt, and this king named So, and again, we're not sure exactly who that king is. He stops paying tribute to the king of Syria, starts paying it to Egypt, most likely. So the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. King of Assyria invaded the whole land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. So the relationship between 4 and 5, again, our normal way of reading is chronological, right? Verse 4 happened, then verse 5 happened. Again, probably, as we've seen many times in here, it's probably not exactly chronological. He probably goes up, invades the whole land, goes up Samaria, besieges it, and in that besiegement is when he captures the king and shuts him up in prison. All right? In the 9th year then of Hoshea, king of Assyria, captured Samaria, carried Israel away to exile to Assyria, and settled them in Halah, Habor, on the river of Gozan, in the cities of the Medes. Those places there are not entirely clear. Many places in ancient archaeology we know what they are. These places we're not sure where they are. The exact location of them for us today is probably relatively unimportant. The point is that the king of Assyria conquers Hoshea, puts him in prison, and then takes some of the Israelites away into exile. And this is the end of the northern kingdom. This is 722 BC. The northern kingdom is now done. Now, why did this happen? Verse 7. This came about because the sons of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they feared other gods. Think here again about how much, as we see in other places in Scripture, the Exodus provides the foundation for really everything that the nation of Israel is built on. And here's the point that is trying to be made. Listen, God brought these people out of the land of Egypt, this great deliverance, made these great promises to them. And at every step along the way, God kept those promises. And you still went and worshiped idols. What in the world? And unless we look too harshly on the Israelites, most of us probably don't have to think back past a couple hours to think of some point at which we sinned against the loving kindness of our God. That should raise in our minds the question of, what in the world? How could you do that against a God who loved you and gave His Son for you? And yet we do it all the time. Brought them up out of the land of Egypt. They feared other gods. They walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel which they had introduced. Now, how many of you at the end of verse 7, the translation I read here said they had feared other gods. How many of you, anybody here have a different word in your translation there, verse number 7, right at the end? They feared other gods. They worshipped other gods. Okay, what do you got? King James? NIV. Yeah, that's the NIV translation. Anybody else got worship? You, Leonard, is that what you have? Yeah. All right, so, revered. What do you got?
It's in the bunch.
Okay, all right, yeah. So the idea, it's the word that's often translated to fear. But in the context of religion, in the context of religious practice, it is the meaning of worship. To fear is to worship. To fear is to bow down, to recognize the supremacy, recognize the authority of it. To fear in terms of being scared. And in fact, when you read the law and the blessings and the curses in the law, one of the things that God is trying to do to his people is to spark in them a sense of fear. That if you do wrong, there's going to come a big hammer. And that's what's happening now. The hammer has come because they feared other guys. They walked in the customs. These two things always go together. To fear and to walk or to live, they go together. That what you worship determines how you live. What you desire. And we talk about worshiping today, somebody said that, the heart is an idol factory. We're always, our hearts, we're always constructing these idols. And our idols really don't look like weird gods cut out of stone and wood. Our idols are much more respectable. But at the heart, those idols are the things that I put it sometimes this way, when fill in this blank, when you say, all I really wanted was what? And that begins to determine what our idols are. All I really wanted was to be liked. All I really wanted was to vent. All I really wanted was to whatever. I don't know what that, but that begins to tell us what the idols in our lives are. And in our modern age, again, our idols are much more sophisticated than the idols of old. They're not any more useful. It's the same empty promises. And so to fear and to walk in the customs of the nations whom the Lord had driven out. Now remember, this was exactly what God told them. When you go in the promised land, I'm going to drive all your enemies out. Why? Because if I leave them there, you're going to become like them. And that's exactly what happened. In the customs of the kings of Israel, which they had introduced. The kings of Israel then began to introduce these pagan practices into the nation. That's what they did. The sons of Israel did things secretly which were not right against the Lord their God. Secretly is kind of an interesting word. It's hard to, on one hand, like God knows everything. In what sense was it secret? Where do you hide from a God who sees it all? That's kind of one of the comic ironies of Genesis 3, right? Adam goes and hides himself. Where do you hide from an all-knowing God? And the answer is nowhere. It's a ridiculous notion on its face. So how is it they did things secretly? And anybody, what do you got there, Chuck? Verse number 9. Secretly, okay. I didn't know if they had a different translation. I couldn't remember. I looked it up, couldn't remember. I think my understanding of this is they thought they were being secret. They were kind of trying to hide it. But again, the notion that you can hide something from God is ridiculous. These things weren't right. Moreover, they built for themselves high places in all their towns. Watch out, a fortified city. They set for themselves sacred pillars, the Asherim. Asherim are the female counterparts of Baal. On every high hill, under every green tree, they burned incense in all the high places as the nations did, which the Lord carried away to exile before them. And again, notice what he's pointing out here. And by the way, this is a summary. So everybody, remember, this is being written to remind Israel of all their history, just like it is for us. And so what he's doing here is summary. Okay, for those of you who skipped 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, those of you who didn't make it all the way to chapter 16, now you're in 17, you skipped all that. Let me just summarize what happened for you. This is it, all right? The Lord carried these idols. They did all the things, verse 11, which the Lord had carried away to exile before them. And again, think about it. How well did those things work for those nations? Not very well. So why do you do them? You have a whole long history of people who got carried off into exile and punished for doing those things. And you thought it was going to be different for you? They did evil things, provoking the Lord. They served idols, concerning which the Lord had said, you shall not do this thing. Probably right out of the Ten Commandments, right? Have no other gods. Make no graven image. Worship nothing else. Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and every seer. Seer was another name for prophet. Turn away from your evil ways and keep my commandments, my statutes. In other words, God warned them. And God continually sent prophets to them. And they what? Wouldn't listen. They thought they knew better. They did not listen. They stiffened their neck like their fathers who did not believe in the Lord their God. They stiffened their neck. Yes, it was. And you see this oftentimes in the prophets. There are known places where the prophets are, you are a stiff-necked people. All right, years ago, I had a Rottweiler, and she's a great dog. Pretty strong. Had a bunch of friends that were scared of her. Probably had a bunch of enemies that were also scared of her. But I put her on her, walk her on a leash, and she kind of started, kind of wanting to go her own way. And she was trained, so you just kind of jerk her, get her back healed. She'd heal pretty good until she saw something she wanted. She started to get that stiff neck, like she's pulling. And, depending on how big you are, a dog like that can pull you away. That's what a stiff neck is. A stiff neck is when that kind of leash around your neck, you start pulling against it, and you tighten up, right? That's the image. Proverbs talks about this. The one who hardens his neck after much reproof will suddenly be cut off without remedy. All right, so you got this image. These are people who knew better, who had been warned over and over and over again, and they just said, hey, we're doing it anyway. They did not listen. They rejected his statutes, his covenant which he made, his warnings which he warned them. They followed vanity and became vain. They went after the nations which surround them, concerning which the Lord God commanded them not to do. They forsook the commandments of the Lord their God, made for themselves molten images, even 2 calves. They made Asherah and worshipped the host of heaven and served Baal. They made their sons and daughters pass through the fire. They practiced divination and enchantments. Remember the divination and enchantments there is I mentioned this Sunday, I think, and somebody asked me about it. I'm not exactly sure how I said it, and this is why I didn't go back and look. Witchcraft, what's called here divinations, enchantments. They're attempts to access divine knowledge without going through God. So it's the attempt to contact the demonic world, to get the knowledge only God can give and the power only God can give, but get it without God. And that's why witchcraft is one of the things in the Old Testament law that was a capital crime. It wasn't like Halloween. Like, we dressed up and went and picked up some candy, and that's worshiping Satan now these days for some. Okay? Now again, if that's what your conscience says, fine. That's not, but my point is that what was going on with this is entirely different than what we often think of with that kind of stuff. It was an attempt to access supernatural revelation and supernatural power without going to God. They did all this. They sold themselves to evil inside the Lord. So the Lord was angry, removed them from his sight, and none was left except the tribe of Judah. So there you see the division of the kingdoms, right? The northern kingdom, 722 BC, it's gone. Why? Because they did not obey God. They did not fear, worship God. They did not keep God's law. They did not listen to God's messengers. They kept turning away time after time after time. And again, go to the ministry of Jesus when he says, I sent you my prophets, and you wouldn't listen. You can't act like this is some sort of surprise, like where in the world did this come from? No, we told you over and over and over again. And I want to remind you, something I've said before, remember when we've talked about the structure of the Old Testament, we have these historic books, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, right? I'll do it your way. 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, right? And after we get done, then 1st, 2nd Chronicles out here, right? But 1st, 2nd Chronicles is actually telling the same story, right? And then once you get through all that, you go to Job and Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and then you get to the prophets, because the prophets come way after this stuff, right? So no, the prophets are this time. In fact, in just a chapter or two, you're going to see the prophet Isaiah. And when you read the prophet Isaiah in 2 Kings 17, he sounds an awful lot like the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 44 and 45 and 46 and 47, 48. You know why? Because he's the same prophet. These people should not have been surprised by that. God warned them. They just didn't listen. Now, look at verse 19. Also, Judah did not keep the command. So this is actually probably looking forward to and what's going to come. Now, it hasn't happened yet. Right now, it's just Israel. But Judah also didn't keep the commandments, walked in the customs Israel had introduced. Now remember, the promise was given to Judah, right? But along the way, they were influenced by Israel. The Lord rejected all the sins of Israel, afflicted them, gave them in the hand of plunderers until he cast them out of his sight. When he torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit a great sin. So the sons of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did not depart until the Lord removed him from his sight, as he spoke through all servants and prophets. So Israel was carried away into exile from their own land to Assyria until this day. And that's kind of the epitaph. This is kind of the funeral service for Israel. And in the end, they're carried away. Now what happens here in verses 24 to 41 is really kind of the aftermath of it. So after this happens, the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, from Cuthath, from Abba, from Hamath, from Sepharvaim, and settled them in the cities of Samaria in the place of the sons of Israel. So they possessed Samaria and lived in the cities. All right, so he carries away some of the Israelites to those cities we mentioned back up in verse number 6. All right, now in their place, he brings people from Babylon back and intermingles them. Now, why would he do this? It's probably to dilute the nationalism of Israel by mixing them with foreign people. All right, now again, this was one reason why God said, don't intermarry the Canaanites, because you will become like them. And the king of Assyria believes that if you intermarry, you will become like them. And if you become like us, you're going to be much less likely to fight against us. And so it's probably, I would imagine, a calculated ploy on the part of the king of Syria to intermarry with the Israelites. What comes out of this intermarriage? The Samaritans, right? When by the time you get to the part of Jesus, time of Jesus, the Samaritans, which inhabit that area of Israel to the Mediterranean, so towards the west, you have this scenario where, and they're all intermarried, and that's why Jews don't like Samaritans. You guys are half-breeds. You intermarried. Right? You're not pure-blooded Jews. You're one of those people. Okay, that, by the way, that's what sparked an awful lot of New Testament problems in the church, because one of the big wrestling matches in the church in the New Testament is how do Jews relate to those who are not Jews, because the early church was a primarily Jewish church, beginning in Jerusalem. Remember Acts 1:8, you will receive power, the Holy Spirit will come on you, and you'll be my witnesses at Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then the remote parts of the earth. And that becomes the outline of the book of Acts, right? Acts 1 through 8 or so is Jerusalem, Judea. Acts chapter 8, they go into Samaria. Acts chapter 13, they begin the remotest part of the earth. And you see the spread of the gospel that way. But what happens when the church starts in Jerusalem and virtually everybody in the early church is a Jew? And then some of these Gentile people, like Cornelius in Acts 10, start getting saved. The Samaritans in Acts 8, when Peter and John go in Acts 8, right? And start preaching the gospel to the Samaritans. And all of a sudden I go, well, we don't want those people in here. And so one of the big issues in church becomes this issue of unity in diversity, that we have all these different people. That stems back to here, the Samaritans, all right? They intermarried at the beginning of the living. They did not fear the Lord. Okay, now who is in verse number 25, at the beginning of their living there, they did not fear the Lord. Who is the they? It's the foreigners, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the people coming in. They move into this place and they don't fear God. So what happens? Well, it turns out, this is kind of a strange story, the Lord sent lions among them which killed some of them. Yeah, really. It wasn't, yeah. Yeah, the lions aren't killing anybody except themselves. That's right. They've been learning for years. So here's what, so you move into this new place, and all of a sudden some of your key men are getting eaten by lions. What do you think? All right, if you're living in modern times, what do you think? What happened to the fence at the zoo? Right? I mean, somebody's got to be doing something about this, right? In the ancient world, you have a very religious mindset. And everything is attributed to divine power of one sort or another. Now, keep in mind, here's another brief outline of not church history, of world history in terms of religion, right? And again, I've described this before, so hopefully it sounds familiar maybe. There was a time, and this was outlined by, I believe, Dawkins, who was one of the famous modern atheists. There was a time in world history where it was impossible to not believe in God. There were too many things that were unexplained. Everybody had to believe in a God. It was impossible not to. You had to believe in God because that was the only explanation. Then there came a time in the Enlightenment period and more towards modern times where it became possible to not believe in God. We began to get some answers for things, and all of a sudden we didn't need God anymore. Right? Then he says, now we're at a time in world history and human history where it is impossible to believe in God. That if you believe in God, you're just dumb. Right? It's impossible for any rational person to believe in God. So impossible to not believe, possible to not believe, impossible to believe. In this ancient world, it's impossible not to believe in God. Right? Everything is connected to divine power. So when these lions start eating people, you say, man, we must upset some gods. And it must be the gods of the new area we're living in. They must have some kind of special God here who's sending these lions. So let's try to figure out. And so they speak to the king of Assyria, the nations whom you've carried away in exile do not know the custom of the God of the land. So he sent lions among them. Behold, they killed because they don't know the custom of the God of the land. So the king of Assyria commands, take one of the priests whom you carried away in exile and let him go and live there. And let him teach the customs of the God of the land. So you have these people, they moved into Israel. They get eaten by lions. Like, hey, this must be the God of the land. We don't know enough about him. They go back to the king of Syria. The king of Syria said, grab one of their priests that we deported, bring him back and let him teach you how to make this God happy so the lions don't eat you anymore. Now, and here's one of those kind of strange confluences of what appears to be a natural event and divine power, divine sovereignty. All right. Again, the lions eat somebody today. Your first thought is, the zookeeper did something wrong and messed up. Or at the zoo, you stuck your hand through the wrong fence, right? Your first answer is probably not, man, what is God doing to that guy? That's just not the way you respond. Why? Because we're in this world where we see things differently. Back then, that's got to be God. Their answer is, let's learn the customs of the gods. So one of the priests came and lived in Bethel and taught them how they should fear the Lord. There's that word fear again, or worship. This is how you do it. Now, here's what essentially happens here. Every nation, verse 29, still made gods of its own and put them in the house places, put them in the high places, which people of Samaria made, every nation. They also, verse number 32, feared the Lord. So what happened? They did not leave their gods and come to Yahweh, Israel's God. They basically, let's just add another temple here. We'll just add another one. What you have is kind of a prime illustration of polytheism and syncretism. Okay, polytheism, many gods, right? What is syncretism? Let's just blend all of our things together. And let's make sure that we make them all happy. You have, in a sense, pluralism. Pluralism. Okay, why? You have multiple gods, have multiple ways to please God. You have multiple cultures because you no longer have just the Israelites in their culture. You also have the Babylonians. I mean, you have, look at verse number 30. The Babylonians, you have the Cuthites, you have the men of Hamath, you have the Avites, you have the Sepharvites. So you have all these different cultures coming together. This is pluralism. The problem is, in Old Testament Israel, pluralism is a bad thing. Because remember, Old Testament Israel, you have essentially a theocracy, God ruling over his people. Now, if you, as I've said before, if you don't make a proper distinction in times with Old Testament Israel and New Testament church, you're going to mess up here. And I fear this is where a lot of churches, and this is dangerous to say, I get it, okay, I'm willing to have the conversation, so let's at least have the conversation, but I think there are a lot of people who want to take the principles of Old Testament Israel and plug them into the New Testament church in the sense that we're trying, in a sense, to create a state church. So I was having a conversation this morning with somebody, and the mayor of Dearborn is a Muslim, 31 years old. I don't know if you saw that in the paper. And in the newspaper article in the Free Press, it quoted him as saying, giving thanks to Allah. Allah is the planner of all things. He made this happen. And this friend of mine is a pretty devout Catholic. We had a couple interesting conversations this morning. He says, what do you think about that? I don't know what you think about that. I'll tell you what I told him. I said, you know what? I'm not overly bothered by it. He's a civil leader. He's a religious man, fine. What I expect is that a civil leader is going to lead for the best of the community. You see, here's kind of the irony of that, is that many Christians would say, oh, that's just weird. We've got this praise be to Allah. And yet none of those people would be troubled if somebody stood and said, hey, I thank God that I won this election. Right? Now, why is it in the civil world that one of them is okay and the other's not? And my suggestion is because we've confused the culture of the New Testament church with the culture and the theology of Old Testament Israel. Now, I know that can be controversial. Maybe some of you right now are just wondering if it'd be inappropriate to walk out at 7:24. Because you're like, I can't believe he's saying that. But again, what was the goal of the Old Testament? The goal of the Old Testament was a theocracy, God ruling through His law over a nation of people who had committed to serve Him. Exodus 20, all that you have said we will do, and they keep repeating it. And again, that's part of what makes this story so bizarre, is they repeat it. All that you've said we will do, all that you've said we will do. And turns out they didn't do hardly anything He said. But they said they would. In a world today, and really a world outside of Old Testament Israel, there is not one piece of the New Testament where the New Testament church is working hard to establish a Christian culture in civil society. Okay, it wasn't their mission. Now again, we live in this thing called the American experiment. And there's some really interesting pieces of history that are coming together in this. Okay? For however long it lasts. And I have no idea. I'm not a chicken little Christian. The sky is not falling all the time. If it was falling all the time, it would have already been on the ground by now. Okay? My encouragement to us is understand there are differences between what is going on here with this pluralistic culture and the world we're living in today. God has not commanded us as Christians to go out and take over the world in a civil political sense. Okay? So let's not confuse that. Larry?
But God is requesting us to have theocracy. By that, God has His rules, and we follow His rules. That creates a theocracy. You're saying don't go outside of that.
I'm saying the theocracy as it's typically, and there are people do this. In fact, a guy who to me is one of the, I read this guy all the time because I think he's a fabulous writer. And a lot of what he says is good, and a lot's just really messed up. But he is a guy who is actually a theonomist. A theonomist is somebody who believes that the law of God ought to be the law of the land. Some of them call it a reconstructionist. They're trying to reconstruct the kingdom of God on earth, and so the Mosaic law should be the law of America. And so when we talk about theocracy, that's typically, now we as people, we should live under the laws of God. Now again, making those distinctions between the Old Testament law we're not under, but the law of liberty, the law of freedom, the law of Christ in the New Testament. So we're not under the law of Israel, because that was a law for Old Testament Israel. We all of us, and the church is to be living under the law of God. And we go back to 1 Corinthians 5. You have this guy among you, not just is he sinning, but he's sinning in such a way that even the outsiders say this is bad. In other words, you should have already concluded this is bad because you live under these laws, these instructions from God. You should have already concluded this is bad. But in this case, even the people outside who don't have the law of God, they also agree it's bad. So the point on that is, I would say that usually when you talk about a theocracy, and this is the charge today, is that the religious right, you're just trying to establish a theocracy in America. You want the laws of God to be the laws of Congress. That's typically what's meant by a theocracy. I think we as individuals should. I'm not I do not believe that the New Testament teaches that Christians should try to institute a Christian state or a Christian government, so to speak.
Wouldn't that be a natural outcome of God's will?
If
He wants us to go out and convert people.
If
By the natural conversion of the people,
right.
you create a theocracy.
If, in a sense, yes. If you make enough disciples, then you can have enough. The problem is that it does not seem to be, at least in God's sovereignty. Well, I want to see, 60,000 disciples in Taylor. As I mentioned recently, somebody I don't remember where I mentioned, if everybody in Taylor decided to attend church this Sunday, there are not enough seats in churches to handle them all. It's just not going to happen. However, yes, if every person lived under their responsibilities to obey God, we would in effect have a theocracy. Right. Seeking for that in the sense that as the term theocracy is used in kind of modern church theology circles, they're talking about something else. They're talking about taking the law of Moses and making it the law of Michigan. And I think that's a really bad idea.
Create the government before the people's ready.
Right. And when Jesus comes, we're going to have a theocracy. He's one who will rule with, as Isaiah says, rule with his eyes will see what's true. He won't believe lies. And so part of the problem with the theocracy today is we don't have a theocrat. Man at his best is still man, and the most godly of us here are still sinners. And so our best attempts at a theocracy are always going to fall short of what it should be. Jim?
When we had the Reformation, John Calvin in the city of Geneva set up a theocracy. Mm. And Baptists were persecuted in it.
Yeah. True, and you have there's a number of events in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries that really where they tried a theocracy, and it just in a sense, I mentioned Sunday the Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials were an attempt at some level of a theocracy. That you're trying. Oh yeah, that's why I mentioned the divine thing, going outside of God to get information from God. Now I remember what I preached Sunday. Some of you who already remembered that, you should have told me what I preached Sunday. But that was in effect an attempt at some level, an attempt at a theocracy. That the God has said you can't do this witchcraft stuff. Now listen, I don't think you should do witchcraft stuff. I'm not sure I want the federal government or the state governments deciding exactly what that looks like. I mean, I've read enough newspaper articles. I know a few people in government. I don't want them deciding that. Okay, so again, where are the boundaries of that? Maybe a little fuzzy for some. But yeah, Calvin, the Munster Rebellion, there's a bunch of stuff in church history that just remind us it's a really bad idea to try to pretend we're Old Testament Israel.
Even in the founding of our country, that's the reason the Baptists stood up and had things written in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Because you had Maryland as a Catholic group, you had Penn with his group, and you even had like Plymouth Colony.
Yep.
Roger Williams had to go to
Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Baptists historically have always stood for the separation of church and state, and it seems like this is just a generic side comment that unfortunately is going to be online, so I'm going to say it anyway. I fear that some Baptists have forgotten that the S is actually generally said to be for separation of church and state. We've kind of forgotten that, and so all that to say, we have a duty, and this is not in 2 Kings. This is free. We have a duty to be Christian citizens. Guys, so when you go in the voting booth, you're a Christian voter. You don't leave that behind. Now, I don't know exactly what that looks like in your voting decisions. Frankly, at times, I don't know exactly what it looks like in mine. I try to do the best I can with the information I have. And there are things I just skip because I don't know enough about them to have a view on what the best way forward is. Now, generally speaking, it involves money. The answer is going to be no from me. All right, but that's about, that's the general track. The rest of them, I'm not sure about that one. But here's the thing I want to emphasize, is we have a duty to be Christian citizens, to live as faithful representatives of Christ in everything we do. We don't have the authority to force that on other people. All right? Now, there is a realm of civil life where, I'm perfectly willing to force on other people, don't steal my stuff. I'm not quite that much of a libertarian. Okay? So there are some laws, but commonly agreed on. But laws, people, and you hear this from time to time, you see a city, well, they want to build a mosque over there, and we need to all band together and deny that permit. So they can't build a mosque. I'm like, why? Because what happens when they come and want to take away the church's permit? And if we're going to walk in the New Testament way, I think we do that a different way. Okay? So, let's try to finish here. I got through exactly half of what I intended to tonight. Verse number 32, they also feared the Lord. And this is where the whole syncretism thing came up at. They also feared the Lord. Anytime you also do something with the Lord, there's a good chance it's going to be down the wrong road, right? So also and the Lord, oftentimes I'll go to better. To this day, verse number 30, they feared the Lord and served their own gods. To this day, they do according to the earlier customs. They do not fear the Lord, and probably do not fear the Lord alone. Okay? They don't follow his statutes, ordinance, law. So verses 35 to 39 then is just a reminder, this is what the Mosaic covenant was. The Lord made a covenant. Don't fear other gods. Don't bow down. Don't serve them. I brought you up from the land of Egypt with great power, outstretched arm. Him shall you fear. To him you bow yourselves down. To him you sacrifice. Statutes and ordinances and the law and the commandments he wrote for you, you shall observe to do forever. Do not fear other gods. The commandment I made with you, do not forget it. Don't fear other gods. But the Lord your God you shall fear, and he will deliver you from all the hand of your enemies. However, they did not listen. And again, there's the epitaph. Fear the Lord, and he will deliver you from all your enemies. But they did not listen. So while these nations feared the Lord, they also served their idols, their children likewise, and their grandchildren, as their fathers did, so they do to this day. The religion of the fathers oftentimes gets passed down to the children. And some people are troubled. You read in the law, the Lord is going to punish the iniquity of the father. They're going to visit the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations. And one of the reasons why is because the children keep doing the same thing the fathers do. And I have said for a long time, I'm a conservative. And by that, I don't mean what a lot of you think I mean by that. I mean, I want to save something to pass down to our kids. So that in the day comes 20 or 30 years, 40 years, whenever it is we're dead, that our children know what it means to be a New Testament Baptist church. That our children know what the Bible teaches. Should the day come that some teaching starts coming in the church that's contrary to the Word, we have people who know enough to say, no, that doesn't work here, because we have passed it down to them. And that's why our children's ministry matters. We got a great children's team. And we want to pass that down to them. Because we're not going to be here forever. One day we're all going to die. And what's going to be left behind? Whatever we pass down. So, Israel didn't pass it down very well. We're going to knock off there tonight. All right. Everything else in 2 Kings is about Judah. We'll pick up with Hezekiah next week. And try to finish it up in the next few weeks. All right, as we end this part, let's spend some time in prayer. Just a couple of things. George Moorhead is still in the hospital. Some of you heard about that Sunday. He fell. And apparently, I was talking to Everett Bealby just before church tonight. He is, they got a whole bunch of different stuff going on, and the end result, nobody seems to know exactly what's going on, at least as Everett says. So they're supposed to be doing some tests. They didn't do them. They're going to do them, not do them, back and forth. So pray for Mr. Moorhead in the hospital. And they didn't do it, though, right? They were going to do a heart cath. Yeah. Scheduled for Friday now. Okay. So, right. So pray for him. Please continue to pray for our pastoral search as we look for a youth pastor. I know you feel like I'm asking you to pray for that every week. I am. And we'll continue to. So please keep those prayers in your mind as you go to prayer. There's prayer sheets around, probably outside if you didn't pick one up on the way in. Have a great night, great week. I'll see you on Sunday, 9:30, 10:30. Have a great